this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today, as always. In a little bit, our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, is going to be joining us to talk about a new initiative for the labor force on the other side of the Rio Grande. Looking forward to that conversation in just a few moments. But as always, let's go ahead and start today's episode with a look at what's trending across the border, starting with after years of legal troubles, South Texas Congressman Henry Cuellar has been pardoned by President Donald Trump. The Democratic congressman thanked Trump for pardoning him and his wife in a federal bribery and conspiracy case. On his social media site, Truth Social, the president said without presenting evidence that Cuellar and his wife, Imelda Cuellar, were prosecuted because the congressman had been critical of President Joe Biden's immigration policies. He said Cuellar, who's a Democrat, quote unquote, bravely spoke out against open borders, end quote. Trump accuses the Biden administration of going after the congressman for speaking the truth. Trump says Cuellar's nightmare is finally over.
First of all, I want to thank President Trump for this action that he took. On behalf of my wife and my family, I want to say thank you. I think the facts have been very clear about this, but I would also say I want to thank God for standing during this very difficult time with my family and I. Now we can get back to work. Nothing has changed. We will continue working hard.
Now, Cuellar says Trump's pardon gives him a clean slate and lets him move forward for South Texas. And a short time ago, he said, quote, "I'm going to go to the White House Christmas party next week, and I'm going to thank the president personally." Cuellar is expected to dive a little bit deeper into this pardon a little later at 8 p.m. tonight on News Nation. So if you haven't done so already, make sure to check out what channel News Nation is on your local programming guides. Moving on along the border, the Trump administration is pausing all immigration applications, such as requests for green cards for people from 19 countries banned from travel earlier this year. Now, this kind of piggybacks on what we talked about yesterday with our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez. Now, this is part of a widespread immigration change in the wake of the shooting of 2 National Guard troops last week. Yesterday, as we said, we told you that Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem recommended a full travel ban without mentioning which countries would be impacted. The changes were outlined in a policy memo posted Tuesday on the website of the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services. They are the agency that's tasked with processing and approving all requests for immigration benefits. Now, this pause puts on hold a wide range of immigration-related decisions, such as green card applications or naturalizations for immigrants from those 19 countries that the Trump administration has described as high risk. Moving along the border now, the Department of Homeland Security has launched an immigration crackdown in New Orleans, saying the operation is targeting violent criminals. A DHS spokeswoman said the operation launched today, and it will target immigrants released after their arrest for crimes such as home invasion, armed robbery, and rape. Some immigration lawyers in the area say they have been inundated with calls, and some businesses have even posted signs barring federal agents from entry. That's something we've actually seen down here since the beginning of this crackdown in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Our Jorge Vela has more coverage on that. You can search that up on borderreport.com right now. Now, moving on, in recent months, similar immigration crackdowns have occurred in North Carolina, Illinois, and California. The administration is also planning targeted immigration enforcement operations in Minnesota, focusing on Somali immigrants living unlawfully in the U.S. Minnesota has the largest Somali population in America. Local Somali leaders and allies have pushed back against the president's plans and are blaming the broader community the broader community for recent fraud cases that are coming to light in the state of Minnesota in public programs. And moving on, a federal judge has blocked the Trump administration from making widespread immigration arrests in Washington, D.C. without warrants or probable cause that that person is an imminent flight risk. The judge granted a preliminary injunction sought by civil liberties and immigrants' rights groups in a lawsuit against Homeland Security. Plaintiffs' attorneys argued that federal officers were frequently patrolling and setting up checkpoints in Washington, D.C. neighborhoods with large numbers of Latino immigrants and then stopping and arresting people indiscriminately. And that is a look at what's trending across the border today. Stay with us, though, because when we come back after the break, our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz has got some new reporting on a new labor force initiative that's happening in the country of Mexico, just over the border from us here in Texas. So stay with us. Border Report Live will be back in 1 minute. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I'm your host here in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. So you may have heard of the 4-day work week, right? There's a push across the country and in several countries across the globe to cut down the amount of hours that the average person is working every single week. But over on the other side of the border, there's a new push to get people down to just 40 hours a week. And it's time now to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, to explain a little bit about this move that's happening south of the border. Hey, Julian.
Hi, Rudy. Yeah, we have a monumental change in the works in Mexico. It's a change that could affect anybody here in the U.S. who does business in Mexico and needs to hire Mexican labor. And what it is that for the longest time, going back to last century, Mexicans have been required to work 48 hours a week. That is the normal lawful work week in Mexico. Believe it or not, that's been in effect since the 1930s. And that when that law was passed in the 1930s, it replaced a system that had operated probably for centuries, in which your employer pretty much had to require you to do the work however long it took. And the Constitution only guaranteed you to be off from work and in your home with your family or going to church or doing any sort of recreational activity on Sundays. So the law has been modified over time. And now what's in the books is you will work 48 hours a week, whether that means working 6 days a week or 5 days a week with 9.5-hour shifts. That's up to your employer and yourself. That has been negotiated through labor unions. Now that we have a different government, a populist government in Mexico since 2018, and now with President Sheinbaum since last year, what we have is a proposal that today she said she was already presenting to Congress to reduce the 48-hour work week to 40 hours without reducing the pay. Now, this has huge implications, not only for Mexican laborers, Mexican workers, who will be able to spend more time with their families and will have time to do personal errands, such as go and pay utility bills, but also for U.S. Plants, U.S. companies that have plants in Mexico, because now they will only have access to their employees for 40 hours a week. Now, to be fair to these employers, primarily the maquiladoras, for several years now, the maquiladoras have kind of adjusted to this Mexican schedule, and most of them give their employees a couple of days off, but making sure that they put in the required work hours. So this change, and we have an explanation by the Mexican labor minister who spoke today on how it would work. But the plan is for this change to take effect by 2030. If we can hear from him now.
Esta reducción de 40 a 48 horas no podrá implicar reducción de sueldos.
This reduction from 48 to 40 hours will not implement a reduction in salaries, contracts, or benefits. There will be a gradual, step-by-step implementation. This proposal will have to be analyzed and approved by the Congress, and if it involves constitutional changes, the state legislators will have to ratify. This reduction cannot be sudden and will follow International Labor Committee standards. We will reduce the work week by 2 hours starting in 2027, so that we are at 40 hours by 2030.
Now, Rudy, I got to tell you that to pass a constitutional amendment, our experience here in the United States is that it takes years, maybe decades, and sometimes it doesn't even happen. In Mexico, obviously, things are quite different. An expert in the past has described to me the Mexican Constitution not as tablets written in stones. I'm sorry, as laws written in stone, but more like a blackboard where you're always updating and trying to improve things. I can tell you that the controversial proposal earlier this year to elect judges instead of screening them and appointing them require a major constitutional amendment, which was passed by a supermajority in the Mexican Congress and was ratified by the required states in 17 hours. So this means that when the Mexican government wants to do something that involves the Constitution, they are quickly able to do it if there is the political will. And it seems to me that in this case, there definitely is the political will to make it happen. Now, I'll be happy to answer any question, and then I can tell you what the employer's perspective is, because I've been talking to several business leaders on this.
Well, yeah, and I was going to ask, you said there is a little bit of will there to make this change in Mexico. What's the temperature there for these politicians? Is it something that is likely to get approved?
Let's put it this way, Rudy. With the supermajority or the great majority that the ruling Morena party has in Mexico, if the president really wants something, they will do it. They can do it. And right now, it seems that everything is lining up. And like I was saying, I have been talking to business leaders on the Mexican side from several associations, and they all tell me that they see this kind of as inevitable. They see it coming. You ask about the political temperature, they see it as almost inevitable. Obviously, they have tremendous concerns. Their primary concern is that this change is coming at the same time as Mexico plans to substantially increase minimum wages. I can tell you that before the Morena party took over, the minimum wage in Mexico was the equivalent of $10 a day. Now, as of 2026, because of this progressive changes in the law, Mexican workers will have to make at least $24 a day. That's more than a 100% increase. So going back to how the employers and the business people, the associations are looking at this, is they're very concerned because they're saying, well, great for the workers, but does that mean more productivity? The government says, yes, happy workers work harder. The employers are no. Regardless of how happy or unhappy the worker is, he works to his or her abilities. And what we have is they work for us this many hours. Now they're going to work for us less hours. So we expect less productivity in general. And obviously, we will have to hire more workers or we will have to pay overtime. And that means an expense for the business. And that expense is going to be passed, obviously, to the consumer. And also, like I was mentioning, here on the border, with all the U.S.-run maquiladora assembly plants, that also is going to possibly mean greater expenses for these businesses as they adjust to having their employees less hours a week or having to pay them overtime to stay and keep up the production lines.
Yeah, and that kind of, leads me to my next question. We see so many of these U.S. companies that go over the border. We've seen manufacturing leave in the last 3 decades to Mexico, whether it be automobiles or electronics assembly, things like that, different products that we use here in America on a day-to-day basis. Is there any concern that, that move to Mexico will no longer be as profitable for those U.S. companies?
I can tell you, Rudy, that there were concerns even before this proposal became almost inevitable. The labor costs in Mexico have increased substantially in the past few years, especially in the past decade. And many companies, what they're doing, what I am seeing here on the border, is that many U.S. companies, many European companies that operate in Mexico are increasingly moving to automate their production lines. In other words, labor is so expensive that maybe we should invest in machines that do some of either the assembly work or the design and engineering work. And that way we don't have to rely on having the same number of employees as before. We can cut our costs by doing these capital investments and having not so many employees here in our plants. I believe that that's the trend that's going to continue to evolve in Mexico, so these companies can adjust to this new reality of a shorter labor week and even higher salaries.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because we see so many of these folks working in the maquiladoras. It's some of the best work available to these individuals. Sometimes the pay is not great, but it does beg the question: could this be leading to perhaps even larger immigration numbers? Coming into the U.S. looking for work when we see these the automated, the robots and the artificial intelligence start to kind of take over in these maquiladoras.
Definitely, that's a possibility. But when we talk about immigration, there's at least two players in this dance. And I've often said that it's three because of the criminals who control the Mexican side of the border. That depends on the willingness of the U.S. and on the will of the U.S. long term to continue to keep illegal immigration in check. Obviously, now there's also problems with legal immigration as there's more requirements. As the Trump administration seems to be favoring professionals and more well-to-do immigrants as opposed to the traditional manual labor that the U.S. for more than a century has been relying on from other countries.
Yeah, and it also, how I know there's been talks when it comes to the renegotiation of the USMCA. Is there any impact that this change could have when it comes to renegotiating that with Mexico as well as Canada?
I think in a way the Mexican government is preempting any such manipulation of labor conditions. What they're doing is they're making this shorter work weeks and higher salary jobs before the negotiations begin next year. That is why when they sit on the table, it's going to be very difficult for the U.S. to say, well, you will increase your work week, you will lower your salaries, because it's already in Mexican law, and they have to work with that. That's part of the treaty. Each country in the treaty, Canada, U.S., and Mexico, will respect each other's laws. But definitely, we expect some fireworks next year when it comes to reviewing, although it's going to be more like a renegotiation from what I hear on both sides of the border of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. We can expect some fireworks.
And, have you heard from anybody on, we were talking about those businesses on the other side of the border and how they're reacting to this. Have you heard anything from anyone on this side of the border when it comes to this change?
Not yet. I think they've all been very vigilant. And like I said, this is only the latest impact to something that was already happening, and that is the higher labor cost. I know from speaking to business associations on this side of the border that companies have been pausing some of the expansions, some of the new investments for various factors, the high labor cost being one of them. Also, now we're dealing with tariffs. That's another another factor to answer your question. So it all has to do with costs. Costs have been going up. So yeah, they're looking at it. And also I can tell you, Rudy, that aside from the businesses in the U.S., the U.S. consumer also will be impacted by this changes in Mexico. Whenever you or I book a vacation in Mexico next year or in the next few years, we inevitably are likely going to see a higher labor cost as the hotels, as the restaurants have to shell out more money for labor. Like I said, the consumer, you and I, are going to have to pay for that.
Now, do you foresee any companies just saying, you know what, we just can't afford to do this? Do you see any companies saying, we're just going to have to cease operations because of this change?
That's a complex question. Like I said, some are already thinking that the costs are so high, maybe we should go to the interior of Mexico, where costs are a little bit lower, or maybe to Central America. However, I say it's a complex question because salaries, labor costs are only one part of the equation of having a maquiladora in Juarez or in Matamoros or Reynosa. The other element is the proximity. If you go to somewhere where labor might be cheaper, your delivery costs, your transportation costs are going to increase. So you have to factor that in. And that's why I foresee most maquiladoras here staying put where they are, reducing their labor force, increasing their automation, and continuing in some way or another to take advantage of the proximity. to the U.S. border.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your reporting on this, Julian. It's interesting that you brought up the travel aspect of that. You know, in our minds, we typically think of the goods, you know, the things that we buy that are assembled just on the other side of the Rio Grande. But the travel aspect, that is, it's something that really I don't think many people think of when they book vacations. I mean, so many people from here in the Rio Grande Valley, for example, they say, why would I go to Hawaii when I can go to Cancun for half the price? So it should be interesting to see how this affects not just that, but the overall travel market as well. So we're looking forward to seeing what happens next if this move goes through. And before I let you go, I did want to ask, I know the labor minister had kind of mentioned, you know, they're going to look into how long this would take, but is there any estimate as to when we could see this move actually happen?
Really, it's going to happen very quickly. The congressional initiative is going to be sent this month. The Congress will probably vote on it next month. And the plan, right now, what the plan calls for is for a gradual reduction of work hours. That is, starting in 2027, you'll work 46 hours. And in 2028, you might work either 45 or 44, and so on until 2030. By 2030, the Mexican government plans to have this 48-hour week in place.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your reporting today, Julian. We appreciate you being here. El Paso correspondent Julian Resendiz joining us today. Stay with us. We got a little bit more to talk about when we come back. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen, Texas. So how much damage could a really bad storm cause on the U.S.-Mexico border near San Diego? Well, a binational environmental group is sounding the alarm about the need to dredge the Tijuana River channel just inside the U.S. territory part of it to avoid massive flooding near and around the San Isidro port of entry. Our Salvador Rivera has the story from San Diego.
It is estimated that the floor here in the Tijuana River channel has gone up by about 10 feet, meaning it would take a lot less water for the river to crest over the levees, generating massive flooding. If you look closely, you'll notice the Tijuana River is lined with concrete on the Mexico side. But as the water flows into the U.S., it turns into a dirt floor lined with levees made of rocks. That's the way it was built 50 years ago. Over time, more and more settlement has settled north of the border.
As the river turns, it deposits a lot of sediment on this side.
Oscar Romo is with a binational environmental group called Alter Terra. For many years, he worked with the United Nations and is considered an expert on water and its impacts on communities. He is concerned with how high the floor in the channel has become.
Based on the amount of sediment that is here, the water has to flow above. There has to be an adjustment, whether to remove the sediment or to elevate the levees.
Romo fears if the settlement is allowed to sit and to keep getting higher, the river will overflow the levees during a major storm event, sending water in the direction of Ped West, a pedestrian crossing at the San Isidro port of entry, and into the Las Americas shopping mall directly north of the border. Large flooding will also take place on the Mexico side, according to Romo.
We see more water coming every single year. All that water flows through here, which is an indication that we are at the risk of having a flood.
Romo believes the Army Corps of Engineers, the agency in charge of maintaining the channel, can easily dredge the river floor, removing layers and layers of sediment, which is made up of sludge from raw sewage, dirt from construction sites, and soil from Tijuana hillsides. Raising the height of the levees requires congressional approval and major funding.
Expensive to do.
Romo says he and others have data showing the settlement has become a big concern.
We have enough evidence to know that the sediment accumulation could be at risk.
Salvador Rivera, Border Report.
And before we go, we wanted to remind you to check out our friends at Political Power Ranker. It is a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nextstar's Director of Political Content, Chris Berg, and Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on data. This week's episode of Political Power Ranker will recap the Tennessee special election, and it'll take a look at some new polling in the California governor's race. So you're going to not want to miss it. Make sure to check it out. You can find more on Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or your local Nextstar station website. For Julian in El Paso, my name's Rudy Mireles. We'll see you next time.